no one gets to choose their parents. We all inherit a story, like it or not. But we can choose what to do with that story. I'm Mike Joseph. The story my parents gave me was full of life and loss, wars, genocide, and ethnic cleansing. What should I do with that legacy? What would you do? I was 50 before I did anything at all. Welcome to Keys, a troubled inheritance. My parents grew up in comfortable and loving families. Their parents wanted the best for their children, to be well prepared for whatever life might bring. One thing they did not prepare for was to become refugees. So, what exactly happens when a cruel and violent world breaks into family life? How do people become refugees? What's it like? My mother's youngest sister, Dorothea, became 10 years old on October the 28th, 1938. That Friday morning, the whole family was up early, enjoying the young girl, opening her presents. Dolls! Dolls! She loved dolls. What's this? More presents? Their father goes to the front door, opens it. 2 policemen stand there. One holds a paper and reads,
Sie haben das Reichsgebiet sofort zu verlassen. Ich verbiete Ihnen,
You must leave the German Reich immediately. I forbid you, without further permission, to return.
We were absolutely stunned and horrified.
My mother, Lily.
These 2 policemen stood there. They gave us time to pack some belongings. And they gave my father permission to go to the bank to draw some money. He needed some, ready money, which was quite astonishing because he could have run away and got lost, you see. But he didn't, of course. He was such an honorable man. He wouldn't desert his family. Maybe they realized that. But we all packed frantically. My mother probably packed some urgent belongings, some food or something for the journey. We didn't know where we were going. We were just told we were to be deported.
Well, it was chaos because, you see, it was Friday morning. Oma and Mama were already baking challis. We used to have a lot of different kinds of breads and things that were being baked. They finished the baking. In between, we were packing.
This is Rose, the second of 3 sisters. It seems that other Polish Jews in Leipzig had been tipped off to evade deportation. 1,300 took refuge in the Polish embassy, while thousands more were driven from their homes.
Our friends who found out about this, they rang us, but you see, the police were already there. We couldn't do anything. But a lot of them who found out through, the grapevine, they hid in the Polish embassy. Papa went there, you see, the police stayed there with our passports and we were just packing. But a lot of people managed to get out. Papa was permitted to go and draw some money and do some shopping. And he went to the embassy and asked what's going on. And the people said, stay here, don't go. And he said, no, he won't abandon the family.
But when my father came back, they put us in a police van, took us to the nearby police station, and there we were taken to the mainline station, the famous Leipzig Hauptbahnhof. And when we came there, we realized we were not the only ones who were being deported. There was a train standing there, a long train, packed with people. All the Jewish community of Leipzig seemed to be there.
You see, anybody with a Polish passport was made stateless.
I found out later there were about 5,000 people who were being deported that day, everybody from youngest to oldest. And we were put onto this train, and it had seats. It was not a cattle train this time. And then the doors were locked, and off we went. And we traveled all day on that train, on a locked train, with no food or drink, except what my mother probably had with us. I don't remember. We were all so shocked. We were just sitting there in stunned silence. There was no talking, or hardly any, as far as I remember, no crying or wailing or anything. People were just so stunned by this dreadful event. This deportation was done with such methodical efficiency by the Germans, with all the state authorities working together, and finally put us in the hands of the SS for the final part of the trip. And it was so ruthless and so brutal and so calculated and carefully planned beforehand. And yet people seem to forget it. It's a date which nobody else knows. It sticks in my memory, not only because of deportation, because it happened to be my little sister's 10th birthday on that day. And that is a horrendous coincidence for me, that it should have happened on what should have been such a happy day.
Lily had one younger brother, Wolfgang, and two younger sisters, Rose and Dorothea. How did Dorothea cope with becoming a refugee on her 10th birthday?
Oh, it was tragic. She hastily packed all her beloved dolls and things in my mother's hat box. She had a big hat box, and Dorschen had stuffed all the things into that. And when we were ordered out of the train in the middle of the night, we didn't know where we were. It was pitch dark, very late at night. We were at a little frontier station, it turned out later, called Beuthen. The station was quite dark, except the platform where we arrived. We were ordered out of the train. My father looked around for a trolley or a porter or somebody for those two heavy cases where I packed all the family silver and valuables. Couldn't move them, they were so heavy. And the SS men, then we realized the SS men were all around us, came with a stick and threatened him and told him to leave the cases there. It was the last we ever saw of them.
They took these suitcases away from him, pulled them away and pushed him or kicked him or something. That was something so horrible, because he was always respected and looked up to. To see him being insulted like that and maltreated, that was something absolutely terrible to me. And from that time on, he really suffered.
And they moved us on, and then there were SS on both sides, and we were driven from that station into what seemed a sort of wood, with very tall trees either side, very rough path going downhill, very, very rough terrain, and big trees either side, pitch dark, and people were driven there like wild animals, with SS on both sides, with sticks and guns. I heard some shots fired behind us. They were waving sticks at us, and we were having to move on faster and faster. They were shouting, "Move, move, move," and threatening if you stopped. And in the middle of this, that hat box where my little sister had packed her dolls burst open. And she cried out. I can still hear her cry. I turned round to help her pick them up, and an SS man came up and waved his stick at us and said, "Keep moving, keep moving." And we had to leave her dolls behind, and that little child was devastated to lose even her dolls at that time.
That was the last that Dorothea saw of her dolls, and the last she saw of Germany.
Anyway, I remember in the morning we found ourselves on the Polish side of the border, having crossed this no man's land, and we were sitting in the outside garden of a small village inn on some wooden benches. And then we realized that our grandmother was not with us, and she caught up with us.
She wasn't there among our group.
How was she injured? Did she fall? Or?
She fell and hurt herself, and the Germans were shooting from behind, to chase us across the no man's land. It was very rough ground. She got in with a different crowd and got to another village, and Papa sent boys around to search for her, and they found her in a hospital. Anyhow, she was very poorly. Her legs were all scratched and bruised and broken.
And what of Lily's parents, Israel and Sophie?
Well, traumatized like everybody else. That must have been the most dreadful shock for them of all people, to have their lives wrecked like this in an instant. But they were very brave. They didn't hear any crying or wailing or complaining. They were just facing it.
Somehow, they found a train to take them across Poland from the German border in the west to Stanislavów in the east. That was Israel Gold's childhood home. He was back in Poland. He had declared he did not want to be there again at any price.
We made ourselves comfortable in this compartment, and Papa drew the curtains and, locked the door, and somebody hammered at the door. And it was a Pole. He wanted to come into the compartment. So Papa said, look, you see, we're already crowded. But he insisted. And then he wanted to know what this was all about. And Papa explained to him, he told us afterwards, and spoke in Polish, that we were expelled. He said, we don't want any more of you Jews here. You ruin our economy already, Jews like you. And that was the first experience.
Welcome to Poland.
Welcome to Poland.
I woke up the next morning, found myself in a strange room, in a strange bed, and I went to the window to look out. There was this courtyard. It was a sort of old-fashioned building. It was a little hotel or inn in Stanislavów, where we had arrived in the meantime. I remember nothing of arriving there or getting to this place, and we must have spent the night there. And outside in the courtyard there was snow lying already. This was the end of October. And there was one of these Polish women in their distinctive traditional peasant dress with lots and lots of skirts, and she was barefoot in the snow. I remember that clearly, like a photograph, with a scarf over her head, and she was beating some rugs or carpets out there. And I thought, where am I, And then it sank in that we'd arrived there and we were staying in this inn overnight. I mean, we'd always been the best of members of the whole family. My father had been helping, not only kept my maternal grandmother, she lived with us, but he'd also helped to subsidize his own mother and family in Stanislaw. When his sister got married, I remember there was some dowry which he provided, and he'd been, the mainstay of the family all along. Suddenly we were there, absolutely turned to beggars. You can imagine how it felt.
Nazi Germany had rid itself of 17,000 Jews, an act of ethnic cleansing to precede genocide. But that left the unfinished business of plunder. The Nazi exchequer wanted abandoned Jewish assets, and that meant taking them into state control under the Haupttreuhandsteller Ost, the Eastern Trustee Office. Many signatures would be required on the transfer deeds, so, amazingly, in spring 1939, Nazi Germany readmitted recently expelled Jews for 4 weeks only to close down and sign over their assets. Everything would then be in order.
He got permission to go back to Leipzig briefly in the spring of 1939 with my mother to wind up his business and to settle his affairs, because everything, of course, had been left totally unsettled and, unfinished. And so in the spring of 1939, he and my mother went back to Leipzig for a few weeks to wind up everything and to emigrate, take out all the personal furniture, belongings and so on. He was not allowed to take any goods out, or anything that would have enabled him to start a new business anywhere else. All he was allowed was to take sewing machines, so he bought some fur sewing machines. Then he had the greatest difficulty importing them into Poland. They wouldn't allow them in without paying heavy, import duty, import tax. So he had another struggle over that. That was in 1939. But to go back to when my parents went back to Leipzig briefly, my sister got her visa to travel to England via Germany shortly after that, so she left and joined my parents in Leipzig, where they must have been feverishly packing and settling affairs and negotiating with everybody, the authorities and so on. And my father had also, by that time, obtained the English visa for me. But the Germans wouldn't grant me a transit visa to cross Germany, just to see my parents once more and then travel on to England. Now, my English visa was due to expire at the end of June, and my German transit visa hadn't come. And I was in desperate straits. So what I was advised to do was to go back to the Polish frontier, to the last Polish little town before the German frontier, and see the German consul there to grant me a visum to travel across Germany. I knew that my parents' permit to stay in Leipzig was running out, that I was likely to miss them if I didn't get this transit visum. I was desperate. I was beleaguering the consulate there every day, like probably hundreds of other people who were stranded there. The Poles hadn't allowed them in when they were deported the previous October. My parents were due to go back to Poland, and I would have missed them, you see. I had to hire a local car to drive me across to the German station on the other side of the frontier, across no man's land again, very, very rough. I got out of this taxi with my little suitcase or whatever I had. I had to go to the local post office because my father had wired me some money there to pay for my train fare to Leipzig. He couldn't send me any money to Poland. All the chicanery, to make things even worse. Mercifully, the guard held the train up for me until I'd been to the post office, which was quite nearby, and drawn out some money to pay for my ticket for the train. Then I jumped on the train and we were off. And I sank back into this compartment with a sigh of relief, and I was only worried, was I in time to meet the parents in Leipzig, because theirs was due to expire. Anyway, on that journey, 1 or 2 stations further on, it was a slow train, which stopped everywhere. 3 German soldiers got into my carriage. It was not a through train, it was just separate compartments. They looked at me and they started talking. Where do you come from? I answered them reluctantly, from Poland. Oh, are the Poles really persecuting the Germans? They took me for a German guy. Persecuting the Germans? What are you talking about? There was a German colony in Stanislav. They were highly respected and feared by the local population because they were very self-contained and troublemakers, People kept away from them because they didn't want any friction with them, The population there was very divided between Poles, Ukrainians, Germans, Jews, There was different antagonisms between all of them. Anyway, nobody tangled with the Germans. So I told them this. And they were furious with me. They started rowing, and I answered them back. I wasn't going to be, contradicted. I told them what I thought about it all. And they certainly looked at me with such hatred, Anyway, they got out at the station afterwards, and I sank back. I was so shaken. I thought, my God, they could have thrown me out of the train or something. What did I do? It was stupid to argue with them. 3 hefty soldiers, full of Nazi ideology. But they didn't. They left, giving me black looks. So that was my journey home. I remember running home and up all those stairs and ringing the doorbell. Nothing happened. I looked through the letter slot and the flat was empty, where before it had all sorts of furnishings. I was stunned. I realized I had missed them. So I ran downstairs to the kind person who'd been such a good friend to us and rang her doorbell. And she said, no, they are still here. They've gone out for the evening to say goodbye to friends of ours. They will be back soon. We phoned them and they came home immediately. They were just due to depart in a day or two's time, so I just caught them there, and my sister.
So you joined your parents in Leipzig while they were wrapping up their...
That's right. Papa he had a visa to come to England,
Who, Papa?
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Well, that happened when we were already coming back to wind up, when I was on the way to London. He got his visa to come to London because he wasn't, likely to start some fur business. And the people who were stateless were being sent to Shanghai, or maybe if Shanghai was the only place where they were allowed in. Anyway, he gave his visum to somebody else. He was approached by the Jewish community if he would, because he had a Polish passport. He was free to go back to Poland. And he was promised another visum, eventually. He bought a ticket to come to London from Warsaw by air, and then war broke out.
I'm astonished.
You didn't know that?
No.
Well, you see, I was in Leipzig with him before Lily came.
Yes, I know that. Papa got a visa for
It
Britain.
arrived then, yes.
Just him?
Only him, yes. But you see, he had to establish a business in order to prove that he can maintain his family. You see, so he got it originally, he says, in order to start a fur business.
And he obtained the visa, and he actually had it with him in Leipzig.
He got it, yeah, well, and then he was approached if he can let somebody who was stateless and who was being deported somewhere, and this is what he did.
How do you know this?
Well, I was there. I was there in Leipzig when that was happening.
Who approached him?
It must have come from the Jewish community.
And the person who was stateless was a member of the Jewish community in Leipzig?
Obviously.
Do you know who it was?
No. I think that was arranged by the community. Then.
But, I mean, how could this be legal? How could it was a deception, was it?
No, couldn't be. I mean, it had to be transferred, obviously. It must have been done legally, but I suppose they did it from the community. A visa was obtainable to come to London, and they must have arranged it, in the community. You see, it was considered to be just a matter of a few weeks. And Papa got already a ticket to fly he paid for a ticket to fly to London.
For himself?
For himself.
Good heavens. From Warsaw to London. He bought a ticket.
Yeah.
He had
he paid for it,
yeah.
And because he couldn't take money out of Germany, so he could pay for it there.
So he had his ticket, he had his visa.
Originally.
You had your
but
visa?
I tell you, if he had come here and the family left there, I don't think he could have lived without.
But he would have set up a business and then
but the war broke out.
But you didn't know that at the time.
No, of course not. But if war had broken out and he couldn't have succeeded in all this, it would have. I don't think he could have lived with that.
But was there? So do you know that there was no way that he could come with his visa to set up a business and then bring over his dependents?
It would have taken too long.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Look, this was in June. Mm-hmm. We came here, I think it was the end of June, didn't we? Mm-hmm. So by the beginning of September, he couldn't possibly have succeeded in that.
My surprise at this story from Aunt Rose is genuine. I did not know this. My grandfather had a visa and a flight ticket to London. He could have escaped, then tried to bring the rest of his family to safety. And he gave it up. My mother, Lily, never breathed a word of this. Why not? She was stuck at the Polish border, so that's why she didn't know? Really? Perhaps Rose was just wrong about both visa and ticket? There's no one left to ask.
I think I had 1 or 2 more days with my parents. I don't remember very much. It was all so hectic and so fraught with, all kinds of problems and emotion and so on. And I just remember the parents taking us both to the station in Leipzig one night for the train to England. And I remember my parents, as if it was yesterday, standing there saying goodbye. There were no tears, no emotion, but, I remember my parents' words verbatim. And I don't want to repeat those, but they put me more or less in charge and, said I should look after myself and after my sister, who was 2 years younger. And then we departed for England.
Do you remember leaving your parents for the last time in Leipzig?
It was traumatic. They took us to the station and I just couldn't stop crying, and they kept saying, don't cry, don't cry. And, there was a man in the compartment and he wanted to know what's going on, I was so upset, but, we didn't want to talk much till we got out of Leipzig. Anyway, we didn't eat or drink on the way. I didn't anyway. As soon as we got on the boat and the boat was still inside, I was violently seasick, And that was a journey when we came to England.
Of course, being young, I suppose the excitement took over. We traveled all night to Flushing in Holland. And there we caught the boat to Harwich. And I remember my mother had given us packed meal for the journey. We didn't touch that until right at the end. When we were on the boat, that's right, the next morning, we had that. And then we were violently seasick, both of us, first my sister and I. And all the breakfast that my mother had packed us went to the seagrass. And we were so sick, we could hardly, control ourselves, I think, by the time we got to Harwich. And then miraculously, once we got off the boat, it stopped. We got on the train to London. And I remember looking down on the outskirts of London and marvelling how drab it all looked. And the houses were all similar, long rows of Victorian brick terraces. And it all looked rather uninviting. Worry about my family, which drove me almost demented. I knew they were in a terrible situation there with no income, no home, no nothing.
How to come out from here as fast as possible?
I got a few letters from them during that time which were full of problems and anxieties.
Today I was at Margoshes, or rather with Fröhlich. Mr. Margoshes has been transported seriously ill to Lemberg. In the meantime, I won't get any help from him concerning a visa. Now I'm trying to get in touch with the Lieberman company. And
their prospects were really grim. I couldn't think what to do. And from the outset, of course, I had the problem of what to do with that container van with all their furniture.
From Dr. Lieberman, I received a letter of recommendation to the firm Glazinier-Rosnioff, and I mean to travel there in the next few days. Perhaps I can achieve with this firm that they send me to England as a representative. Otherwise, I don't know who can help me from here.
The parents could pay for the transit and the transfer of it, the cartage of it, up to London docks and not beyond. And of course it was costing for storage there all the time, and the customs people were kicking up a fuss,
Hopefully you will succeed that Wolf and Dorla will be permitted to come to England soon. It will hurt me a lot to give away these two children too. But what other alternatives do we have in this position now? Yesterday I went to Warsaw and hoped to get an order for England at Glazinier headquarters with Dr. Lieberman's recommendation. Unfortunately, this trip was unsuccessful too.
And I didn't know what on earth to do. I had nowhere to put it. I couldn't pay the charges which had already arisen for the landing and the storage of that furniture. I wanted to save it, of course, for my parents, who were hopefully going to join us here sometime, and had nowhere to put it and couldn't afford to keep it.
Your nerves, Lee, are really very in need of a rest. So far there's no war. Perhaps there won't be one. And if not, then we must not frighten ourselves to death in anticipation. Perhaps, despite everything, we will all be together again one day. In the meantime, we shall have to stick it out here because there are not as many places to flee to as you think. Perhaps later on, if things would just calm down, I'll be able to get a visa for England. In the meantime, dear Lee, do not lose heart and make sure to stay healthy. The two of you over there can perhaps scarcely imagine what you mean to us and how much we miss you. Despite everything, this is good, and we don't regret sending you away from here. Just don't forget to write. I kiss you from my heart. Your Pa.
After weeks of turmoil and worry and anxiety about the parents, of course, the war broke out, and that put a stop to every hope that they might join us here, because they couldn't have come. They were immediately occupied by the Russians, and they were under Russian occupation until 1941. That summer, of course, the bombing of London got worse and worse. The district where I was living, in Brixton, was among the earliest to be bombed because they came from the south, and South London was bombed even before the centre and the East End and the north of London was bombed. Our district was badly hit. They managed to hit all the water mains and gas mains. We were without heating, water. the food ran out in the shops. It was a daily struggle. I was working hard that time. I'd even volunteered for first aid duties and air raid precaution. I took a short training course at the town hall to get a diploma, to be able to cope, to help if anything struck the factory where I worked by that time. And so every time the air raid sirens went during the day, I had to put on my white overall, one or two others as well, and get all the first aid equipment out. It was a time of utmost turmoil with all the raids and the bombing and the problems that arose. And then, of course, the raids started at night. Every night London was being pounded by bombs, and our district had a lot of hits. We spent every night in the Anderson shelter in the garden. There was a dugout shelter where all the people in the house had to go every night, and we sat all night on hard kitchen chairs while the bombing was going on. One of the daughters of my landlady needed to go and pay a visit to the toilet. She didn't go very far. She went out into the garden while the air raid was on and the searchlights and the guns were going. And her mother shouted after, "Quick, quick, Gladys, hurry up, they'll see you." It was such an idiotic thing to say in the circumstances, when any time a bomb could have hit us all, and finished us all off. But I remember that to this day. It was such a light relief from this stressful business.
The Blitz drove the refugee sisters out of London, and by 1941 they found digs and work in Reading. Occasionally, a letter from Soviet-occupied Poland managed to find them.
Dearest children, we wait in agonies for some news from you and whether you're well. When shall we see you again, fit and well? Untold times in a day do we look at your dear picture. If we only knew you are out of danger. With us everything is well. We're not in need. Wolfgang goes to his music classes very eagerly and with great success, and Dorla is at school, very outstanding and a very sweet girl. Mama is always very overworked, in demand, and I as well. Remain fit and well and happy, my dear children. Many kisses from all of us. Your father. I write so few lines and have so much to ask and to tell you.
That was the last letter Lily received from her father. On Midsummer Night 1941, Hitler launched his invasion of the Soviet Union.
I remember the morning when I heard of a German attack on Russia and the invasion of that part of Poland which Russia had occupied. It was one summer morning. It was, I think, in June 1941. I heard it on the radio in the morning, just as I was going out to go to work. And I walked down that street. It was a beautiful street on a hill overlooking the Thames and Reading in the distance, and high trees on both sides. And I was going down the hill towards the office, the street where the office was. And I was absolutely reeling with shock, because I knew that this was going to be the end of them. And the Germans were invading that part of Poland again, where they had at least been fairly safe from the Russians, even if in very difficult circumstances. But once the Germans had attacked there, I knew that was the end. And of course, all communication stopped after that. There was still some hope that we would meet again. But, it was such a long, drawn-out period of worry and uncertainty and not knowing, you see. The pain just went on and on and on. And one had to cope with everyday life and try and survive all day long. And then in between you would suddenly think, what are they doing? Where are they? How are they? A feeling of guilt that I should have got engaged when I did and married when I did, wondering whether they were still alive or whether they were perhaps just being killed at the time, or who knows? There's no telling.
My mother died on a midsummer morning in June 1999. 58 years earlier, she was walking down a beautiful hill overlooking the Thames with high trees on both sides, knowing it was the end for her family. Lily would be moved that so many years later you have now heard her tell her story. But what, I wonder, would she make of sharing this series with the story of Fatima, another daughter and mother, a story of lifelong loss, destruction, expulsion, and life as a refugee in Gaza? And how would Lily feel to know that today, as I prepare to tell Fatima's story, she, her journalist son Sammy, and her grandchildren are all under siege in Gaza, cut off from water, food, power, and internet, under bombardment night and day, waiting to discover if they will escape to become refugees or die as they could not leave. Because refugees are not the most unfortunate of mankind, whether sheltering from the Blitz in London, washed up on the beaches of Lesbos, Pantelleria, Dover. They have already escaped the inhumanity of their homeland, their regimes, and their neighbours. The most unfortunate are those unable to escape, trapped to await their fate. Israel and Sophie Gold, trapped in Nazi-occupied Ukraine, all efforts to rescue their family from the coming genocide defeated. Fatima and Sami Abu Salem, trapped in the Gaza Strip, all exits sealed, nowhere safe from bombing, hunger and thirst. And that's why the second season of Keys will be dedicated to telling both of their stories.
To hear how Mike discovered how Nazi Germany killed Israel Gold and his family, and who did the killing, and how Jewish forces expelled Fatima Abu Salem, and then how Israel turned her and her family into lifelong refugees, please follow the second season of Keys in early 2024. This was episode 9 of Keys, A Troubled Inheritance, an investigation of genocide, ethnic cleansing, and one family. For more information and news of the second season, please go to mikejoseph.wales. Next time, in episode 10, we hear how generations of violence and injustice since Israel's creation and the Palestinian Nakba forced Mike Joseph to reject his parents' Zionism. That's all next time, in the last episode of the first season of Keys, A Troubled Inheritance. See you then.